Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Transportation Committee. I believe we have quorum in the room. Before I run through the agenda just on a transportation-related matter, I'd like everybody to remember that today is Tim Hortons Send a Kid to Camp Day, so as you're traveling through the drive-through, that's the transportation link, as you're traveling through the drive-through, if you could remember that, and it's a great cause, and it's a lot of good work that they do in the city to make sure some of our less fortunate kids get out to camp every year. So we have no regrets this morning. Declarations of interest, we received none. Confirmation of the minutes of the 6th of May, 2015. Thank you. Communications, we have response to inquiries, 3 of them: snow removal, safe accessible sidewalks, and Earl Armstrong Road at Vimy Memorial Bridge. Yes, Councillor Furry?
I'd like to bring forward a motion regarding the inquiry response on the snow removal in the school zones.
I think we have to move first to remove it or from the agenda, or lift it from the agenda. Is everybody in favor of that? Okay. Can you introduce your motion?
I have a question.
All right, well, we'll deal with that next then.
So I work with staff. We're getting a lot of complaints in areas where schools are not on main streets. When they're on main streets, it's not an issue, but when they're in residential zones, I'm sure other colleagues as well have seen some challenges. It's not that our sidewalk plow or our road plow don't do it. It's the timing of it becomes an issue in the drop-off zones, school buses and parent drop-off zones, where we push the snow to the edge of the curb, and then there's nothing to let the kids over the snowbank onto the sidewalk and into the school zone. So if committee recognizes that, I mean, I was going to do a motion, but at the same time, it's a direction to staff just to look at our maintenance quality standards be amended to include all direct access points within school drop-off zones be cleared, recognizing the school hours to affect bus loading, unloading, and parent drop-off. So that's where we'd love to see more coordination and giving our school bus drivers as well as parents easier access to the curb edge for safety reasons.
Okay, so you're going forward as a direction then, Councillor?
Well, I prefer if it were a motion, because then we could go back to the school board and say we've done our end, and I know that school board. So
the complaints are coming from residents or coming from the school board? Just for clarification.
Combination. So we've received comments from the school board, from the parent teacher groups at different schools in the area.
So I'm going to ask, I think Kevin Wiley is out in the audience somewhere or at the table. Kevin, can you deal with this as a direction? Is that sufficient for you to go off and do an inquiry and come back with a costing for the additional work?
Yes, Chair. Staff would be happy to take that as direction.
Are you satisfied with that, Councillor?
Well, I'm concerned because to me it's not about additional cost. It's about we're doing the work, we're plowing. It's coordinating that work. So I'd much rather see this pass to affirm our commitment to the school zone areas, and that's all we're trying to do. It's within policy. We're clarifying the policy to give through this a clear standard for our staff to look over.
Well, why don't you do this then, Cal? Because there seems to be some confusion. Staff seems to think that there may be additional cost to this. So what I'm going to suggest is perhaps you can introduce a motion of sorts today, and then between now and next meeting, staff and you can go off and figure out exactly what the nuts and bolts of that motion are going to be, and then it can be dealt with at the next committee meeting.
Chair, I'm fine with that. I just want you to know that the amended portion was from staff on this.
No, and I understand that, but there seems to be a lack of clarity as to whether you want to go ahead as a motion or direction. Staff says they can deal with this as a direction, but as part of that direction, staff has indicated they need to look at the issue of whether there is going to be additional costs. You don't seem to think there is going to be additional costs, so I think we need to clarify that, especially if it's going to go ahead as a motion, so that all the colleagues around the table can have all the facts in front of them before they vote on it.
Yeah, I definitely want to bring it as a motion. I have no problem. We're not waiting for snow in the next couple of weeks, so it could be a notice.
So it's in the motion, and you can work with staff on the exact wording before it comes back. Perfect.
I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns about this particular response? Okay. Councillor DeRouge, you wanted to speak to Leroy Armstrong. Just a quick question? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff, for preparing this report. I just need a clarification on what they meant by the hard surface. Is it, I know it was supposed to be gravelled in 2016, and staff recommended it will be upgraded to the surface. I'd like to know what kind of overlay. Is it overlay or tar or asphalt? So I just need some clarification on that.
Chair, I think I was looking for somebody in the audience from ISD. I think that would have to be referred to ISD for that clarification.
And do we have someone in the audience that can answer the question, or we're going to have to... Are you okay if staff gets back to you offline, Councillor, on that particular inquiry?
No problem.
Okay. Are there any other questions on any of the inquiries?
Yeah, I'd like to... I have some questions on the...
Okay, so everybody's okay with lift? You're talking about number 2, safe accessible sidewalk?
That's right, the Elgin Street.
So everybody's content with lifting that for some questions? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I asked this inquiry on the day that we approved the Elgin Street patio pilot, and I think that we need to start moving forward in the city on expanding our public space, and especially in our downtown with pop-up patios, which a report that we're anxiously waiting for here, and. But for me, the day that we approved this report, and people want patios. I understand that. I do too. I actually hang out on them. But I also want good sidewalk space for folks who have to traverse by foot. So a few questions back. I was disappointed that staff feel that we can't do anything on Elgin Street this year in terms of providing some space throughout the summer. That's temporary, and I just note a few things, if I may. Paragraph 3, Public Works staff reviewed the existing street width of Elgin Street between Lisgar and Gladstone and concluded that extending the sidewalk by 0.2 meters would result in lane widths of 2.8 meters in some places. Now, I went out and measured, and that is true in some places, but of the 5 patios, it would only be the case at the patio at Woody's. So, we still we'd be able to redeem existing center lane widths of 3.2 and curb lanes of 3 and 3.5. So, I guess my question is, we do... Staff also, suggested that the minimum lane width of 3.2 would result in safety hazards between large vehicles, such as buses, and other road users, such as cyclists and small vehicles. But my question is that, we do discourage drivers from passing cyclists if the lane is too narrow. So I'm having a hard time understanding then what is the threshold for a shared lane versus encouraging cyclists to take the lane. And given that, these lanes are already too narrow to safely pass a cyclist, then I guess I'm having a hard time understanding that how narrowing them further will create that hazard.
Phil, are you coming up to answer? Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Good morning.
Yeah, so I guess when we did the measurements, when you get to below 3.2 meters, especially on Elgin Street where you have buses and that need that width just to safely cross, I mean, that's where we tell cyclists when you got those really narrow lanes to take the lane. We see that in construction zones where we have to reduce lanes to 3 meters at minimum. We actually put signs up to let the cyclists know that, you know, you don't want to be on the side, you just take the middle of the lane. And we are piloting some projects on our Wellington Street's an example with some sharrows and where we have some narrow lanes to get them out in the middle of the road.
But I guess my question again comes back to, you know, I just see the city is kind of stagnating by, you know, death of 1,000 bus mirrors, if you will. You know, I know we have wide buses and they've got mirrors sticking out, but, you know, I get frustrated that we can't move forward, that we can never narrow a lane, you know, for, you know, we have to keep traffic moving quickly. We, you know, buses, I'm not sure what we can do about the mirrors. That's not your problem, but again, you know, we've got, you know, plenty of places where, you know, I think if you cycle on Elgin Street, you take the lane. There's today you cannot not take the lane. You can't have somebody safely pass you on Elgin Street. So again, I just go back to the fact that, you know, it's, I think that we need to really look at what are the exact standards that we're going to use, because this suggests that, you know, in 2018 we'll take a look at it and, you know, try and do something better with Elgin. But unless we have some good, like, very clear standards, very clear policy around what is the lane width, what can we do, I worry that 2018 will come and the response will go back to, you know, buses and, you know, even in terms of buses stopping and needing enough space to pick up folks. You know, we have, you know, right now if a bus is stopped at a sidewalk that's only 1.8 meters, there's still not a lot of room for people to congregate. So, you know, I think that I would, you know, I'll be looking to staff to make sure that we know exactly what we can do and where, and that we can plan for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions about any of the inquiries? Okay. So item number 1 is the Ministry of Transportation presentation on the preliminary design and environmental assessment study for the rehabilitation and replacement of Ottawa Queensway Midtown bridges. And we have a presentation by MTO on that, so we'll hold that. We'll just hold it for a few more minutes as we run through the rest of the agenda. Thanks, gentlemen. Number 2 is status update, Transportation Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending May 27, 2015. Received? Okay. Number 3, semi-annual performance report to Council Q4 2014 and Q1 2015. Received? Thank you. Number 4 is the Linda Lane parking assessment. And is that received? Received. Okay. Sure.
Just want to thank staff, Mr. Beauregard, Mr. Caldwell, for all their work on this and the extensive consultations that they had with the community.
Thank you. Number 5 is the O'Connor Street Bikeway, Wellington Street to Fifth Avenue. And we have a number of, we have a staff presentation. We also have a number of delegations. So we'll hold that one. And number 6 is private approach bylaw 2003-447 revisions. Approved? Carried?
Mr. Chair, just a comment on that.
Okay.
Wanted to thank staff for this. There was a bit of a gap and a loophole in the process, and happy that this is brought forward to resolve that internal connection of so that when we do approve a site plan, we know what the length of the curb cut will be. So thank you.
Thank you. And finally, number 7, roadside memorials options for regulations report, which basically directs staff to go off and review best practices amongst other cities. Received? A really quick one? Okay.
So we originally had this come forward as part of our midterm governance review in 2012 to deal with these roadside memorials, and then there was direction as well given in December of 2014. I've been asking for updates on it, and absolutely nothing. And now we have a motion to deal with the exact same thing that was supposed to be dealt with 3 years ago. Just curious why?
Through the chair, there has been quite a bit of discussion because of the sensitivity about the roadside memorial signage program. We'll be launching it in June, though. We do have the program complete, and we're ready for a launch in June.
All right, that's good news. Thank you for the update.
Other than that, carried? Okay. So we'll go back to the first held item on the agenda, which is the MTO presentation on the Ottawa Queensway Midtown Bridges. So, gentlemen.
Thank you, everybody, for having us today. My name is Don Rowett. I'm a senior project engineer with the Ministry of Transportation, and we're here today for information to discuss, I guess, the free information, the preliminary design of the Holland to O'Connor structures and our bridge management plan for that. The Ministry has retained Morrison Hershfield Limited in concert with the Bytown Engineering to complete that study for us. To my immediate right is Steve Taylor, a project manager from Bytown Engineering, and beside him is Andrew Harkness from Morrison Hershfield Limited, and Mr. Stephen Taylor will take you through the presentation now.
Okay, thanks, Don. So the purpose of today's meeting is to give a review to committee of the preliminary design recommendations, and also to thank the city for contributing staff to participate on the municipal advisory committee, who's guided the study through the last 2 years. And I'll go through these points and end up talking about the next steps in public consultation. So the study area extends from Holland Avenue in the west to O'Connor in the east and includes 23 structures. And each of these bridges are twin structures except for O'Connor, and it totals 23. The work program that we proceeded with for the study was to define a bridge management plan for the 23 bridges, to consult with stakeholders in the community to build that plan, and then at the end receive environmental clearance to carry it forward for construction by the ministry. So the existing conditions of the bridges are divided into 2 categories. The rigid frame bridges, which include 21 of the 23 structures, were all built in the same era. They're the same structure type and have the same type of configuration. They have varying conditions from fair to good and have reflected in our study recommendations. And the scope of the structural element of the project was to define short-term holding strategies that could carry over the bridges, review rehabilitation or replacement alternatives and select one of these 2 choices, and then find a complementary traffic staging plan that could deliver the projects. The second structure type that we've got in the study area is the CPR O-Train Bridge, again built in the same era when the Queensway originally constructed. And that bridge is nearing the end of its service life, and it has only looked at replacement alternatives and, again, traffic staging alternatives that could be conducive to the replacement option that's selected. So the study recommendations evolved using a very comprehensive evaluation approach. The ministry uses this MATS evaluation methodology that prioritizes performance and environmental effects. And the recommendations have ended up being divided into 3 groups of alternatives in 3 geographic areas. And I'll describe each of those. So we've got rehabilitations in Section 1, which is the Holland to Bayswater replacements in Section 2, which includes the O-Train and Preston to Booth Street rigid frames. And in Section 3, we've got 2 replacements for Bronson and Percy and 2 rehabilitations at Bank and O'Connor. So to just describe the rehabilitation, so this gives a view of the existing conditions of the bridges. The majority of the deterioration is occurring in the bottom photo on the left shows the centerline joint. There's some deterioration where we have water that's infiltrating between the 2 bridges, so that's an area of corrosion, as well as the outside barrier walls. So work that will be involved in rehabilitation of the bridges that we've selected to carry forward to be salvaged and rehabilitated generally includes removing the concrete or the overlay, replacing the concrete overlay that it was replaced in 1984-85, and then asphalt, new barrier walls, and minor repairs to the substructure and frame legs below. So the locations on rigid frames where we're going to replace them include Preston, Rochester, Booth, Bronson, and Percy. And the photograph I've got in here shows the construction methodology where those bridges will be built off-site from the existing Queensway and will be built in staging areas and then be lifted into place and transported to the new bridge locations. It's a very innovative approach that the ministry are undertaking for the project, and I'll describe more in a second. So this is the design of one of the replacement rigid frames. So this we don't think has been done in this fashion and size anywhere in the world. And it, in the shaded area shows the new bridge that will be carried and lifted into place. And it's going to be set on the existing footings. So the existing footings are the bottom in here. And it'll be a claw-type design from the frame leg that will be dropped onto the existing footing. So it's a very efficient, it's very time efficient, it's very cost efficient, and it's an innovative approach that the rapid replacements will be brought into the Queensway. So the next slide just shows the largest of all the rigid frames that will be replaced. So this is Bronson Avenue. Same approach methodology. It's just a heavier structure with a longer span, but same technical recommendations to bring it in and place it on the existing footings on a single weekend. So the third type of project that we'll be delivering is the staging areas for the rigid frames will require off-site locations. So we've got the group of 3, the Preston, Rochester, Booth Street, and those staging areas are proposed to be in an existing parking lot. This is a recommended location, and it's just east of Preston Street between Aberdeen and Beach Street. And the recommendation is that there'll be a lease of that property, and it'll create a bridge farm from which the bridges will be transported to the sites. The second staging area location is going to be for the Bronson and Percy Street structures, and in yellow shows the paths for the transport of the bridges. And we have 2 staging locations, one on the south side of the Queensway for a property the ministry currently owns, which was the former school board site, and one on the north side of the Queensway, which is A1 storage at 458 Catherine Street, and that's a recommendation for purchase based on a combination of retaining wall and the bridge projects coinciding at the same time, and the existing building is actually underneath a cantilevered section of the Queensway. So this is one of 2 locations that have that condition. So the O-Train is the third bridge type that we're going to be doing, and it's going to be a rapid replacement, but it's got a different methodology. And one of the key issues for the O-Train corridor will be maintaining service as much as possible for the existing O-Train, and that's one of the key conditions that we'll be describing. So this is the recommended structural replacement type for the O-Train. It'll be a jack and slide replacement. So the substructure will be built in advance underneath the existing bridge, and then on a 3-day weekend, which we propose to be the August 1st long weekend, the replacement structure will be slid into place, and it will maintain the existing track, protection for future twin tracking, and the existing multi-use path on the east side of the corridor. At the end of the preliminary design phase, we actually looked at the constructability, focusing on the west pier. And where my cursor is shows a line of existing piers for the current bridge. And we have, in the last stages of the preliminary design, made a recommendation to move the west abutment to be behind that line of piers. It'll avoid conflicts with the active O-train. It'll make the new abutment up on a rock ledge. And one of the other benefits of that change will be it'll provide space that won't preclude any future recreational pedestrian facility on the west side of the O-train corridor. And that was one of the comments that we've heard as part of a consultation process. So as I said, the O-train will have a jack and slide technology. It's similar to some of the superstructures that are replaced on the Queensway. The difference in this location is that the O-train jack and slides will be built over top of the O-train, right beside the Queensway, and they'll be slid from the south and north sides into place on the weekend the bridges are removed. So as I said, one of the issues is the O-train service. So there's 3 timelines when the O-train will be influenced. The first is the pre-event activity to build hoarding over top of the rail line and our substructure to support the new superstructure being built on both sides of the Queensway. Our change to the west abutment is going to reduce any effect on the O-train, and all the work that we're proposing in advance of the weekend jack and slide will be scheduled to occur at night. The second period where there'll be an effect will be the jack and slide weekend, and we've met with the O-train operators and are recommending a 3 to 5 day window where the O-train ridership will be moved to bus service, similar to other events that have happened on the corridor. And the third time frame will be the post-construction cleanup, and that will be nighttime operation. That will be outside of the operation of the O-train itself. One of the other issues at the O-train location is a commercial building that's on the south side of the Queensway. So it's this blue building. At the time of the original Queensway construction, the freeway was built to span over top of that building. It was in federal ownership at the time. Our technical review of alternatives for the bridge and retaining walls in close proximity to the building is that we would buy the building, and that will then become a useful area for the jack and slide staging area. So the new bridges will be built on the south side in space that this building currently occupies, and they've been involved in the study. One of the common elements for the community that there's been interest along the corridor is that the ministry are going to deliver a context-sensitive design with each of the structures, whether they're rehabilitated or replaced. There's going to be a common theme throughout the replacement structures that matches the philosophy the ministry are taking elsewhere in the corner. It's going to include these decorative pilasters at the frame-laid locations. It's going to include new lighting and landscaping in each of the quadrants. And the philosophy is to make them more open, more pedestrian-friendly, better personal security and safety for users under the bridge. So what are some of the environmental effects that we've ended up with the project? They include there'll be road closures at the replacement sites, so we're estimating that to be 3 weeks in duration. We have detour routes to the next street that will parallel the work. There will be sidewalk disruptions. There'll be some in the longer term, but through our discussions at our Municipal Advisory Committee, we've come up with a way to minimize those disruptions through use of hoarding and temporary access down to the footing, so the contractor will be able to get in and measure the exact location of the footings with sidewalks being open above. There will be Queensway closures for all the replacements, so whether that's the jack and slide or the heavy lifts. And there will be 2 lane closures for each of the rehabilitation projects, and they'll happen on consecutive weekends. So there will be some traffic impacts, but we've done extensive modeling, and the full closures or partial closures of the Queensways are the alternatives that provide the least effect to operations on the Queensway. We'll have 2 properties that are affected by the outcome of the evaluations and recommendations of the study. One is the 47 Yonge Street So that's for recommendation for acquisition. And the second recommendation for acquisition is the A1 storage building on Catherine Street. And both of these properties are currently situated underneath the Queensway itself. There'll be a long-term lease of the private parking lot on Beach Street, and MTO's property section will negotiate that lease. And the other effect of the project will be the staging areas and short-term property and hoarding that will be over top of the O-train for the O-train replacement. We've had extensive public consultation as we've gone through the project. It's included a project website. We've had our 2 public information centers within the study area. We've got comments from the public, and they've led to modifications being done as part of the study. And we've had a consultation with both the city and the NCC as part of our Municipal Advisory Committee. And our plan is that we're nearing the end of the technical activities. Our Transportation Environmental Study Report is just being finalized, and the public filing of that document is expected for June or early summer. So to finish my presentation, these are the key issues that we've had as part of the study. So we've had support for longer bridges, and our technical evaluations, our MATS process has led us to use this very efficient location of matching the existing spans for the rigid frame locations. And we have been able to use a longer span bridge for the O-train location. We've had comments to try to minimize the closures of sidewalks for pedestrians. And through discussions at a Municipal Advisory Committee, we have been able to reduce what we showed to the public at PIC2, and we'll use hoarding and temporary access for the footings over top of sidewalks. There has been support for consideration of narrow lanes to provide additional space for pedestrians and cyclists for bridges that are rehabilitated. So those changes, if considered, could be done at the detailed design stage of the project. They're under the jurisdiction of the City of Ottawa. If we wanted to change some of the lane space that are used for parking or vehicular use for wider sidewalks, that could be part of a city decision. We've had comments and concerns that we should be careful about the loss of parking in the Preston Street area. So one of the mitigation measures that will be identified in the tester is there will be signage to additional lots that are just beyond the Preston Street area that may have capacity. We've had comments from the public related to safety, wanting improved illumination of cross streets. And as part of our Municipal Advisory Committee, the city are part of the study recommendations to improve lighting for uses under the bridges, and that's part of hand-in-glove recommendations with a context-sensitive design. And the last key issue was from the public, from our second PIC, was support for allowing a space for a multi-use path along the west side of the O-train location. And based on refinements at the end of our preliminary design, the revised longer span won't preclude any other use on the west side of the O-train corridor, and that will be documented in our tester. So we're near the end of our project. We've got a lot of steps that have led us to this design. We're confident in what we have, but we'd be happy to answer any questions on process or issues.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor McKenney has a question.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for this. Just a couple questions. I just note that first off, thank you from many people in the community that you will be widening the overpass over the Trillium line that to allow for a future access for a cycling route and pedestrian route along the west side. So appreciate that work that you did along with the mayor here and staff. We know that a lot of effort went into that. I just want to ask about the fact that because you're not using bridge abutment areas for staging at, I think you said at Preston, Rochester, and Booth, you're going to be using the Aberdeen parking lot. Will this allow you then to leave that green space along the sides in place that It might not seem like a huge big deal, but we have very, very little of it in the downtown.
Yes, certainly. I mean, for those structures themselves, they're going to look very similar, minus, the changes to the context-sensitive designs that Steve had mentioned to you. But generally, in shape and configuration, they're going to look very similar. And that green space, yes, should still be there. And one of the things we did open up as part of this project was to try and partner with the communities to improve those spaces, whether that means for us moving our fences back and really trying to get the community to have their sense of identity in those areas, so they can approach us through encroachment permits and whatnot to actually revitalize those spaces.
Okay, thank you. And just one other quick question. What criteria did you use to determine whether you would rehabilitate versus rebuild? And the reason I ask is just that, in the downtown we've got, 5, just in Somerset Ward being rebuilt, and just wonder if it wouldn't have been much less disruptive to have them rehabilitated. And I just wonder what the criteria, I'm not arguing against, I just wonder what the criteria was.
Well, and actually it's a very, very long list of criteria, and pretty much anything you can think of what was considered in those, everything from traffic disruption to cost. In terms of those, the ones that are being rehabilitated versus replaced, the disruption is actually fairly similar based on the schemes that we have at this point in time. The big difference for the ones that are being rehabilitated are areas that we either didn't have enough space, there weren't enough rooms, or there were more constraints to actually be able to physically pick up and remove those structures. So that was a big factor in those ones. But I think you'll find with the disruption itself is very similar between the two different schemes.
And I just want to point out that I'm pleased to see that you're going to consider narrowing some lanes underneath those overpasses to allow more room for cyclists and pedestrians.
Well, I think we'd be looking for the City of Ottawa to be leading that one. For us, when we're in there doing work, we've always partnered with the city if they requested work for us. But that would be a municipal responsibility to tell us that that space, that's the available space under there, that you'd like to reallocate to something else. So we'd be looking to the City of Ottawa to be bringing that forward to us.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Flory.
A couple of questions following what we're seeing on the current work and is reflected in those pictures. When you're driving and you're going over these bridges, you're noticing a glass or plastic feature on the edge of the wall. I wonder what's the idea behind that, because with snow and use, wouldn't it just look cheap after a couple of years?
And actually, there's a couple of reasons we do those. Sometimes it's because of whether or not we want to preserve a view rather than having a tunnel section in there, for instance, becomes a perception of a tunnel. The other reason is a structural reason. Those panels are actually lighter than the other ones. So over the top of structures, if we do require less weight, then we will go to a clear panel. In terms of the long-term, I guess, making sure they don't look cheap, they're actually a self-cleaning panel that do work really well. We've been using them in St. Catharines, that area, for a number of years now, and they've actually held up very well.
Self-cleaning. I wish I had self-cleaning windows.
Yeah.
Also, in some of the underpass, we have some pretty great artwork, especially on the one on Preston. I wonder through this project how, I know you've demonstrated the look and feel and some of the light features and so on, but I wonder how that's promoted through the renewal of these bridges.
And for the Preston one specifically, we've been in discussions, obviously, with the BIA that takes care of those murals, and they have every intention of when we replace Preston to put those murals back, both the painted-on ones and the ones that detach. And obviously, we're willing to allow that to continue. From the other ones, again, it would be on a case-by-case basis. For some of the other streets, I know we've obviously got a mural program with the City of Ottawa right now for several of the structures in this stretch, that when communities or the city itself approaches us for them, we do look at those. There are some restrictions just so that we can continue on our inspections and the maintenance things that we need to do. But we're always open to partnering with the communities in the city on those.
I think that'll be important because as we're leading into 2017 and we're nation's capital. We want to make sure that those areas can have, can look very friendly and appealing.
And these projects won't be done before that time frame. We're talking later on build-outs, especially for the rigid frames like you're talking about, Preston and whatnot, 2018, 2019 build-out, and years beyond that. So in terms of the 2017, you're not going to see large changes for these structures that we've discussed.
And the construction is not starting before then?
No.
Okay. And
except for the O train. Right now we anticipate going right into detailed design, finishing that up late 2016 with possible construction in 2017. The majority of that would be the work off to the side underneath the Queensway.
And that's where I was going, the O train. We're seeing that it will impact that Bayview and that last station of the O train. Have you worked with our OC staff to minimize the closure of our O train? It's such an important corridor, and have you looked at station location and stuff like that to enable the service through this?
Yes, we've been in continuous contact with them throughout the project, trying to learn what their constraints are, what we can and can't do. I don't believe there are any impacts right now to that station, to the north you're speaking of. There's no impacts to that station that we foresee even during construction. The main thing is going to be during the slide itself. We obviously can't have the O trains running, so it's going to be that 3 to 5 day duration that we need the O train to be shut down.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tymoshenko.
Thank you. Just very briefly, as Councillor McKenney's already touched on this, as you know, and yourself touched on, you've heard feedback that when these bridge replacements are occurring, that any opportunity to increase space for pedestrian or cyclist be achieved. My understanding then, though, is that, making that span wider is rarely possible, or you looked for that and did it where you could?
We did look at that because of structure type and the method of replacement. It is not an easy thing to do. Very complex, very expensive. And when we went through, we did look at the feasibility of it, and when we did our evaluations of it, it came back to being that the same spans was the way to go for those structures. So no, there will be no extra space underneath those structures themselves. Again, the only way for it to change anything, that would be reallocation of the existing space.
Well, thank you. I guess thanks, but no thanks, in the politest possible way. I know we don't give direction or instruction to another level of government, but as you would certainly know, we are looking for ways where we can to get that additional space. It's now up to us to work with our staff on notice, though you already know that from me, that we'll be looking for ways. Those pinch points under bridges, over bridges, are always the critical ones for both cyclists and pedestrians, and often lead to conflicts even between the two of those, usually where they want to share a sidewalk because the cyclists aren't comfortable on the road. So we'll need to look for how to reallocate that space. Thank you.
Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to MTO staff for being here this morning. One of the questions I think was already covered about the timelines, because I didn't see any timelines in terms of actual construction, but you were saying 2018, 2019. And my key point on the timelines was, as you know, we have a lot of construction going on in the city in the next few years, and to obviously coordinate those construction projects to make sure that we mitigate the effects on our residents. But my other question was just about the process of how often you assess the bridges and the process to determine. I see in your presentation we're in pretty good shape. Most of them are in good, fair condition, and obviously I think you're doing a good job, because we don't see any bridges collapsing, knock on wood, like we do on the Quebec side sometimes. But if you can talk a bit about that assessment process and how often we do it, and when we decide that we do need to go in and rehab or reconstruct a bridge.
Sure. So legally, we're required to inspect our structures every 2 years. That's the law, and that's what we do. The majority of them we do from our structural staff ourselves. We also do outsource some to service providers as well. But again, it's a ongoing 2-year thing. In terms of programming your rehabilitation or replacement, again, that's all a function of the condition and what you see during those assessments. And then we basically prioritize our structures. When they get to a certain age and condition, we start to plan, which is what this is, right? Those bridges, I mean, there's nothing wrong with them today in terms of safety or anything like that, but it's time to make sure that we have a plan in place so that we do get to them before we reach that point.
Good to know. So it's really proactive in terms of the assessment process. And
certainly.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
And I believe Councillor Caudry is the last question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation this morning. Question regarding accessibility during construction. How are we going to maintain that in terms of the sidewalks? Are you going to close both sidewalks? Are you going to keep one open? And how does somebody with the accessibility device maneuver through the construction zone?
And yes, we're going to have to, in some cases, close one of the sidewalks. And the main thing when we get into our detailed design and we narrow down the time frames for when we will have to close that sidewalk is to ensure that they have another way through, whether that's the opposite sidewalk and not having both closed at the same time, for instance, or whether or not that's the next crossing of the Queensway, and to ensure that we do have continued room for pedestrians so they can get through safely. That's the main concern at first, is one, can you get from one side to the other, and two, can you do it safely? So there will be sidewalk closures. We've attempted to minimize them, what we think is the minimal time that we have now, but when we do get down to detailed design, we will look at making sure that they have accessible routes.
Would you be having somebody on the site to monitor that accessibility is, available to the people as they need? Because sometimes during construction, barriers get placed without consultation or without thinking about the accessibility issue. So I just want to make sure that there will be somebody on the site to manage that kind of an item going forward.
Yes, there will. We'll be very clear in our contract language, first of all, to make sure the contractor knows what he is and isn't responsible for. And then obviously we always retain construction administration staff, whether that's our in-house staff or outsourced staff, that are required to make sure that all those constraints are followed. So we will have people on site to monitor that, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank MTO for coming out, and anytime you want to come visit us with good news, or funding even, you're more than welcome. So thanks again. We're going to move now to the next held item, which is number 5 on the list, which is the O'Connor Street Bikeway, Wellington Street to 5th Avenue. Now, we do have a staff presentation. We also have a number of delegations. But what I'm going to ask to start, if we could, is I'm going to ask Councillor Chernyshenko to introduce a motion that he has been working on along with staff and myself in and around this report. And I think that will give some context to where we hope to go with this, and may also answer some of the concerns that some of the delegations may have about what we propose the final plan is to look like. So, Councillor Chernyshenko, if you could introduce your motion first, and then I propose we go to the staff presentation, and then before questions to staff, we'll deal with the individual public delegations, and then we'll go to any questions for staff.
Thank you very much, and I really can't do this without giving a bit of context first. I am very much in support of this report. Clearly more so if these amendments, if these changes are made. In a sense, O'Connor is 2 different streets. It is the very busy, wide, one-way boulevard that you see running through downtown that is an on-ramp to the Queensway, that is a very daunting place to cycle, and yet in a perfect location with an underpass under the Queensway to put a bike route. And then there is the Glebe section, which is a relatively calm, low-volume, low-speed street with stop signs at almost every intersection, a very high residential area with some multi-residential buildings and some particular uses, schools, diplomatic zones, and others. And when we looked at that, instead of me saying this by reading out all the whereases, I guess I'm putting it into my own words here. When we looked at all of that, I agreed with staff that as ideal as it may have been to have a separate dedicated cycle lane through the glebe section, where we ran into some very real challenges affecting people that we could not resolve in other ways, I was comfortable with going to a shared use of sharrows, but I wanted to only do that with additional traffic calming measures where I felt that they were merited. And I also wanted us to look at not just stopping at Strathcona as we originally looked at, but seeing how far could we push the separate lanes closer to First Avenue and still accomplish the overall goal here. Put that in other words, see how far we could push those separate lanes. So that really covers the background with all the whereases. So I'm asking staff, this motion asks staff be directed to revise the O'Connor Street Bikeway Plan to include bike lanes on O'Connor Street as proposed by staff at the April 2015 open house for the section between Strathcona and Glebe Avenue, with the exception between Patterson Avenue and Monkland Avenue where shared use lanes will be provided. That staff be directed to investigate the feasibility of providing additional traffic calming features, and if possible to include them in the design on the sections of O'Connor Street where a shared use environment will be implemented. That staff be directed to assess the feasibility of modifying the existing bulb outs on O'Connor Street to better accommodate cyclists and to adjust the recommended design accordingly. And that staff be directed to review the opportunity to designate O'Connor Street as a 30-kilometer-an-hour zone from Victoria Avenue to Homewood Avenue. As I'm reading this, though, I'm thinking this may not be the most recent version of this. We actually had the most recent version talks about First Avenue, not Glebe Avenue. So can staff help me on that? Thank you. Glad to catch this now. Almost all the same. The difference being in that first paragraph that staff be directed to investigate the feasibility of revising the O'Connor Street Bikeway Plan to include bike lanes on O'Connor Street between, this would be an additional paragraph, between Glebe Avenue and First Avenue, including the provision of an advisory lane on the east side to accommodate the school bus loading zone. To explain that, I asked that it be extended to Glebe Avenue with the exceptions of a couple of particular zones, the medical clinic and the diplomatic loading zone. But we also felt that it would be possible to push it as far as First Avenue with the exception of the school bus loading zone during the periods where school buses actually are there. That would become an advisory lane at that section. So in a sense it could act as a full bike lane when it's not a school bus school period, but bicycles then move out and use a shared lane outside of that. I know it's a lot of material. Glad to help explain that later in discussion. But thank you to staff for helping me with this motion, and we can discuss this as we go through.
So just again to put a bit more context, both for the committee members and anybody in the audience who may want to speak to the matter after your presentation, Councillor Chernyshenko indicated that he'd been working with you on this motion. Is it safe to say that before you get into your presentation, the staff is supportive of the recommendations in the motion?
Yes, we are, Chair.
Okay. So I think that, again, I think that would be helpful for the members of the committee and those in the audience. I think what this is really about is, as with a lot of the transportation projects in the city, this is about balance. It's about recognizing that all the residents in the city travel around the city in a whole variety of different ways. On any given day, they could take the bus, they could ride their bike, they could walk, and they could drive. And so when we go forward and we make a change like this, we have to keep all of that in mind. I think staff is doing their best to do that, to to recognize that we want to have more cycling facilities, we want to have more pedestrian facilities, but at the same time to recognize the needs and the concerns of all residents, in fact, sometimes the same resident on any given day, about how he or she is going to get around town. So again, I think it really does have to be about balance for all the users and balance for each individual user depending on what you're doing on a particular day. So I'm going to turn it over to staff for presentation, and then, as I said, if you could hold your questions until after we've introduced the various public delegations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Cornel Mucci. I'm the Program Manager for Strategic Transportation Planning. On my right-hand side is Robert Greenwood, Senior Project Manager for the O'Connor project. And further far on my right is Heidi Cusino. She is the Program Manager for Area Traffic Management. And she is the Project Manager for the south part of the project. Before Robert delivers his presentation, I will just highlight how does the O'Connor project fit into the city's long-term strategic plan. To build a city that is more sustainable, the focus of our transportation planning efforts has to continue to be on moving people. And in terms of the trends, the picture is rather positive. During the last 15-20 years, there are more people living in downtown, there are more jobs in downtown, there are more people traveling to and from downtown, while the number of cars to and from downtown has been steadily and slowly decreasing. That is a very healthy trend, and that is the trend that will have to continue in the future. The Confederation line will considerably contribute to that trend for longer distance trips, but for shorter distance trips, cycling and walking will have to have a big share. The Transportation Master Plan objective is to increase the cycling modal share in the inner area from 8% to 12% for internal trips. That's quite a significant increase, but it's doable with appropriate cycling and pedestrian facilities. And the Laurier bike lane is providing the east-west spine for cycling in the downtown area, and the O'Connor bikeway will provide the north-south spine. And with that, I will ask Robert to continue with the presentation of the details of the O'Connor bikeway.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of committee. Happy to be here to present to you today the findings and recommendations for the O'Connor Street bikeway between Wellington Street and Fifth Avenue. The recommendations before you are the result of studies that have been conducted over the past year or so. This work was initiated in the summer of 2014 based on the Council-approved Transportation Master Plan and Ottawa Cycling Plan, with the goal of creating a functional plan for a crosstown bikeway along O'Connor Street that will provide a safe and comfortable northbound and southbound cycling link. It was established early on that this project will not be a full street reconstruction, but should work as much as possible within the existing roadway curbs in order to deliver a cost-effective solution for the bikeway within the constraints of the affordability envelope in the Transportation Master Plan. The O'Connor Bikeway will be Ottawa's central north-south bikeway. The implementation of the east-west bikeway, which includes the Laurier Avenue segregated bike lanes, and the significant growth in cycling that resulted from that project, has set the stage for the O'Connor Bikeway to satisfy the need for a high-quality central north-south route. The bikeway will ultimately connect Parliament Hill in the north, the downtown core, Centretown, the Glebe, and Lansdowne Park in the south, and will provide a more centrally located alternative to the heavily used Rideau Canal pathway. The Ottawa Cycling Plan identifies O'Connor as a cross-town bikeway and as a spine route within Phase 1 of the OCP implementation, which is between the years 2014 and 2019. The recommendations for O'Connor are the result of two studies. The first, the O'Connor Street Bikeway Study, which covered O'Connor between Wellington Street and Glebe Avenue, for which I am the project manager, assisted by Parsons Consultants. And the second, the Glebe Neighborhood Cycling Plan, which includes O'Connor between Glebe Avenue and Fifth Avenue, which was managed by Heidi Cusino, assisted by MMM Group.
bikeway was divided in two in recognition of the very different contexts of O'Connor north and south of the Queensway, or Isabella Street. To the north, it is a high-traffic, high-speed arterial road. To the south, it is a quieter local street. The two contexts are illustrated in the images on screen. The study started with a review of relevant policies and design guidelines, including the city's cycling facility selection tool, to generate a list of preliminary options for consideration. These included conventional bike lanes, either physically segregated or not, depending on the context, a segregated bidirectional bikeway, which is designated space for bicycle travel in two directions. This could be either on the east side or the west side, and shared use lanes, where cyclists and motorists share the road, which in the case of O'Connor is only appropriate in the south sector within the glebe. There were also different options, combinations of the options considered. The various options were screened down based on a series of consideration, including those listed on the screen here: accessibility, traffic impacts, including public transit, safety of all road users, designated zones along the corridor for loading, taxis, and so on, operations at critical intersections like Catherine Street and Isabella Street in the south, peer review input from a Dutch design consultant, on-street parking, and insights and best practices from other jurisdictions. This screening led to the identification of alternative concepts for a more rigorous evaluation. The alternative concepts were evaluated based on input from the public and targeted stakeholder consultations, as well as a qualitative, criteria-based evaluation, which included 30 different criteria ranging from policy to accessibility to safety. From this evaluation, 2 draft preferred concepts were identified to be developed into a proposal for the O'Connor corridor. North of Isabella, a segregated bidirectional bikeway on the east side, and south of Isabella, conventional bike lanes on both sides. The project included a very comprehensive consultation program to engage community groups, property owners, residents, and others from the very beginning of the study. We made every effort to talk to anyone interested in this study and sought out those who might have an interest. We posted signs on the street, we went door to door up and down O'Connor, we held individual meetings with specific property owners, hotel managers, and small business owners, and we held 2 public consultation events, which were attended by almost 100 people each. The full details of the consultation program are included in the report. The feedback received over the course of the consultation was strongly in favor of the bikeway project, clear direction on the need for physical separation of cars and bikes, predominantly in the north sector, a desire to see the bikeway implemented quickly, concerns about impacts to parking and curbside access in the glebe, and the expression of support for bike lanes in the glebe rather than shared use lanes. During the April 2015 consultations, there were numerous and significant concerns raised by residents about the impacts to on-street parking and curbside vehicle access in the glebe associated with the introduction of bike lanes for the full stretch of O'Connor. And as a result, the plan was revised to include shared use lanes in order to minimize these impacts. The revised recommendation acknowledges the lower traffic volumes and lower speeds of this two-way street and the unique need for on-street parking and curbside access in the area, for example, to serve multi-unit residences with frontage only on O'Connor that have no off-street parking or vehicle access and whose residents rely on the residential on-street parking permit. Bidirectional bikeways like the one proposed for O'Connor in the north sector are not common in Ottawa. However, they are established in other Canadian cities and in some cases have been in place for many years. For reference, the study team researched examples from other Canadian jurisdictions, including Hamilton, Ontario, Montreal, Quebec, and Vancouver, BC, to determine lessons learned, best practices, and alternative design details, such as pavement markings and traffic signals, to inform the development of the functional plan for the O'Connor Bikeway. The top image on this slide shows Cannon Street in Hamilton, and the bottom image is de Maisonneuve Boulevard in Montreal. The recommendation for the north sector of O'Connor between Wellington Street and Pretoria Avenue is for a bidirectional, segregated bikeway on the east side, as illustrated in this image looking north on O'Connor. This example cross-section shows the all-time parking lane on the west curb side. This is typical along the corridor, but it does vary by block. For example, at the north end, north of Nepean Street, the curb lane provides parking off-peak and a traffic travel lane during the afternoon rush hour. The detailed block-by-block plan is included as an attachment to the staff report. Continuing south, a transition block is needed to segue from the bidirectional bikeway in the north to the shared use lanes in the south, and for this reason, bike crossings are proposed at the O'Connor-Pretoria intersection, with bike lanes on both sides south of there between Pretoria and Strathcona, which is the last one-way block of O'Connor. On one side, the bike lane will be contraflow to vehicle traffic, so a buffer is proposed to separate cyclists from oncoming cars in this block. South of Strathcona, the plan calls for shared use lanes given the lower speed, lower traffic volume environment. Pavement markings and signs will be added to help guide people traveling by bike and to make motorists more aware of the presence of cyclists. Additional traffic calming measures will be considered in order to ensure low vehicle speeds in this area. Implementing the O'Connor Bikeway as recommended will result in the following outcomes. For pedestrians, since the project works almost entirely within the existing curbs, there are practically no impacts to existing sidewalks. In the north sector, the new bikeway will provide a buffer space between the sidewalk and vehicle traffic, moving pedestrians out of the splash zone, and a new pedestrian crossing is recommended on the east leg of the O'Connor-Isabella intersection, which would improve connectivity for those traveling on foot from the Glebe to points north. In terms of accessibility, by putting both directions of bike traffic on the east side in the north sector, the west side curb is preserved for vehicle curbside access, such as parking and pickup and drop-off. Also, the bikeway design maintains a grade separation between bikes and pedestrians, with bikes on the road pavement and pedestrians up beyond the curb on the sidewalk. People traveling by bike will see significant improvements in safety, comfort, and connectivity. They'll be able to travel both north and south along the bikeway and will be physically separated from heavy and fast-moving vehicle traffic in the north sector. There will also be an emphasis on safe intersection and driveway design where bikes and cars may cross paths as the project goes into detailed design. Motor vehicle traffic during the afternoon rush hour will exhibit longer travel times and queuing north of Isabella, and changes will be required at intersections to accommodate the bikeway, including at the Highway 417 ramps at Catherine Street and Isabella Street. Overall, lower vehicle speeds are anticipated as the corridor is narrowed with reduced vehicle lanes. Changes to on-street parking and curbside access in the north sector will vary by time of day, as some west side parking is changed from off-peak only to all-time availability, and the east side parking lane is replaced with the bikeway. Some new on-street parking will be added to side streets, however, it will not be possible to reinstate all loss of parking. The various designated zones along O'Connor for taxis, hotels, loading, and so on will be retained, relocated, or removed as indicated on the recommended plan, with 2 zones in stage 2 of the project to be addressed in coordination with the future reconfiguration of Albert Street following LRT implementation. Given the reduction in vehicle lanes proposed for O'Connor and the potential traffic impacts, a comprehensive traffic analysis was conducted. Historical traffic counts indicate that traffic volumes on O'Connor are decreasing by about 1% per year, and as experienced on other city projects like the Laurier Avenue segregated bike lanes, when traffic capacity is reduced, drivers can be expected to respond by either diverting to other routes, changing the time of their trips, or changing their mode of travel. In order to account for these expected changes, but also to recognize that such changes take time to fully play out, the traffic analysis considered both a day one traffic scenario of zero traffic growth, in other words, the existing traffic volumes, as well as a second projected traffic scenario with a 10 to 20% reduction in peak hour traffic volumes. One aspect of the traffic analysis looked at queuing. The graph on screen here shows how the peak lineup or queuing of cars at 2 critical intersections varies through the course of the day. So along the bottom is the time of day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and the vertical axis is the length of the peak queue. The red line shows Catherine Street queuing, and the blue line shows Somerset. The graph shows how queuing will be highest during the afternoon rush and will be significantly lower, usually less than half as much, through the rest of the day. These results show the projected traffic queues with the bikeway in place and the day one traffic conditions with no reduction in traffic volumes. So this is a conservative analysis showing what might be referred to as the worst case scenario for queuing. Another aspect of the traffic study looked at intersection capacity. This graph shows the utilization for the same two intersections, Catherine's in red and Somerset in blue, under existing conditions. So the two lines represent the capacity of each intersection that is utilized over the course of the day, and you can see that it ranges between 20 and 70%, and the space above the red or blue line up to the dashed 100% line represents unused capacity. So this graph is existing conditions. The second graph illustrates proposed conditions, again using a day one traffic scenario with existing traffic volumes. You can see in this second graph how the capacity utilization is generally higher and reaches or just exceeds 100% during the afternoon rush hour. During other times of the day, it fluctuates between about 35 and 80%. The results of the analysis and the summary of trade-offs for the recommended plan are summarized as follows. The plan will result in new and improved cycling network connectivity, increased person capacity of the corridor, increased cycling safety and comfort, an improved pedestrian experience, an increase in the daytime supply of on-street parking, and lower vehicle speeds. The impacts will be increased afternoon peak hour car travel time and queuing, reduced vehicular capacity of the corridor, decreased evening and weekend parking supply on-street, and loss of curbside access on the east side. Note that all of the impacts noted in the right column of this slide apply for the north sector only, since minimal changes are proposed in the glebe to vehicle lane configurations and intersections. Timing for the implementation of the O'Connor Bikeway must consider several constraints. First, the resurfacing of O'Connor, with which implementation of the bikeway will be coordinated. Second, avoiding construction disruptions during the 2017 celebrations of Canada's 150th anniversary. And third, the opening of light rail transit and the reconfiguration of Albert and Slater streets with changes to the bus transitway. We are therefore recommending implementation in two stages. First, between Laurier Avenue and Fifth Avenue, coordinated with the resurfacing. And second, between Wellington Avenue and Laurier Avenue post-2017. A preliminary cost estimate has been prepared and will be refined and confirmed during detailed design. Including design, construction, and contingencies, the estimate is $4 million for the total project, divided into $2.8 million for Stage 1 and $1.2 million for Stage 2. Thanks for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to stay up there for a few minutes as we hear from the public delegations. Our first delegation is Alex DeVries, representing Citizens for Safe Cycling. If you could come to the front, Alex, and you'll have 5 minutes to present, and Alex will be followed by Kevin O'Donnell.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Alex DeVries. I'm the Vice President of Citizens for Safe Cycling. We're an organization that's been around for 30 years, and we have about 220 paid members. We've talked quite a bit about this project, and I'd like to present our position on it. We think that it's really important to support this project. It's going to make a big difference in the lives of not just cyclists, but also the community at large. We've seen that the Laurier bike lanes have made a very big impact on supporting cycling in the city and in getting new people to bicycle. And we think that this project has the same possibilities. More cycling means reducing the number of cars on our streets. It also means reducing the pressure that we have for clogged buses, because we see a lot of buses that are full these days. And it's also a cheaper form of transportation. I think this is really good for people who don't bicycle, just because that's where their tax dollars are going. This also addresses the need for a north-south bike route, which the city hasn't really had before, and I think that's going to make a big difference. There's been extensive consultation. I'd like to thank Heidi Cousineau and Robert Grimwood. I don't say this very often, but some of the consultations have been phenomenal. I've never been to a consultation which involves interactive design, which has attracted 70 people at once. That's a really new thing in the city. I'm very appreciative of that. We also think it's important to support the amendment that Councillor Chernushenko has put up. Although we would like to see the bike lanes extended all the way from First Avenue School all the way down to Lansdowne. That's not in this plan, but we're hoping that can be revisited later depending on the success of this initial project. So this has been in the Transportation Master Plan for many years. I think it's going to make a big difference in the adoption of cycling and reducing congestion in our streets, and I hope that you're going to support this motion and this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for coming down. Don't go away. There may be some questions for you. It's always nice for someone to come down and say we're doing phenomenal work, so thank you for that.
Does it happen?
Are there any questions for the delegation? Councillor Kalkish.
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks, Alex, for all the work you do in advocating for cycling in the city. I just had a question. I know in the Transportation Master Plan we revisit that every few years, decide where the priorities are to put the money on certain links. How did the cycling community advocator decide that, Parliament Hill to the Glebe was sort of a priority now? And is that sort of piece one, and then you were talking about extending it further south? How do you decide that that's a priority versus other cycling links?
So we agree with the priorities of the Transportation Master Plan. Of course, we didn't write it. The city staff did. The biggest thing is right now there is no good north-south connection. Our city is generally spread out east-west, and we think that the Laurie Bike Lane, as well as other projects, Laurie and the East Bikeway in general address a lot of those issues, but this is the first time a north-south connection has been addressed. In particular, the intersection of O'Connor, where it goes under the Queensway, is extremely difficult and has a nasty history of past collisions. So that's why we think that this is a good next project to be able to address the complete network that we need for cycling to be comfortable for people of all experience levels.
Okay. In the next round of TMPs, I'm actually interested in having your help to work with me on some of the missing links in suburban neighborhoods where we see, whether it's Finley Creek or Barhaven, into getting into those bike paths from the suburbs and the missed connections that are out there as well. So thanks again for being here and for your work in the cycling.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Chernushenko.
With your permission, Chair, I'll ask a question of staff arising out of the delegation. Alex, you mentioned eventually going to Lansdowne. This has come up already. A couple of my colleagues have asked for clarification. Why does it stop at Fifth Avenue, almost to Lansdowne? I know the answer to that, but I'll ask perhaps Heidi Cousineau or Robert to explain the difference between the O'Connor Bikeway project and the Glebe neighborhood bikeways. A subtle distinction for most of us.
Yep, thank you. So the Glebe Neighborhood Bikeway project was looking at quick wins, quick solutions that we can do within the overhaul neighborhood of the Glebe to connect within the existing network. It did include a portion of the O'Connor Bikeway, recognizing that it was designated as part of being the major north-south bikeway connecting eventually all the way to downtown. The portion between Glebe Avenue and Fifth Avenue in particular has, as you mentioned previously in your motion, a large percentage of residents that are multi-dwelling residents or small apartment buildings that don't have any off-site parking, and they rely on the on-street parking permits of O'Connor Street. And through our consultation program, this was raised as a serious concern for a lot of the residents in that area of losing that access to not only parking, but also just general curbside access in terms of being able, with permission, to stop in order to load, unload, and whatnot. So that section is different from further sections to the north for those needs.
Thank you. That is helpful to add that in. I'm specifically, though, wondering what happens at 5th. People are wondering, you almost got to Lansdowne. You've almost got to Holmwood, where you could then continue through Ottawa South and on to Alta Vista. What are the plans and what is the timing of that section? It's not what we're voting on today, but it's certainly a question that people are wondering, why are we stopping there? We aren't, but can you explain that, please?
So south of 5th Avenue, the section of O'Connor Street that continues south of 5th Avenue is also part of my Glebe neighborhood cycling program that we are working on, and we are further recommending connections to continue further south directly into Lansdowne. We are looking at options like a contraflow lane on that section of O'Connor because it is back to being a one-way street. The eventual plans for the O'Connor Bikeway for phase 2 of the event of O'Connor Street Bikeway is to turn at 5th Avenue and to cross over the new bridge at 5th Avenue at Queen Elizabeth, connecting to Colonel By, and then further continuing south, continuing the north-south network that way as additional phases of the north-south bikeway.
And just finally, what is the timing then for example, that last block of O'Connor, 5th Avenue to Lansdowne, and the rest of the Glebe Neighborhood Bikeways project?
The timing of the Glebe Neighborhood Bikeway is we're implementing as soon as we can. We still have a few consultation activities that we want to do with the directly impacted residents in sort of block-by-block sections. So that will be happening over the course of the next few months. And then we will be implementing phases of the plan in stages as we can, starting with the ones that are easier to implement in terms of pavement markings, and then the ones that require a bit more construction, we have to coordinate with our colleagues in ISD to implement the construction.
Thank you. And I did say last question, but I believe that's all done under delegated authority now, is it not? So although we don't need to come back to Transportation Committee to describe it, certainly it's my intention, and I suppose all of ours, to publicize that work.
Correct. Because it was more of a local nature within the community itself and not a major bikeway portion, that's under delegated authority.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for this delegation? Okay, thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you.
And next up is Kevin O'Donnell, and Kevin will be followed by Mike Richler.
Hello, Chair, Councillors. Thanks for your time in addressing this really important bikeway. I'm also supportive of the bikeway, especially the northern portion. That sounds great. I'm mostly here to speak about, actually I'm going to, and Councillor Chernyshenko's motion I also support. I'm actually going to address you now on the assumption that the Councillor's motion passes and the amendments proposed are adopted. I think they're very reasonable, and I'm just going to assume that is going to be the way it is. I still want to address, though, the staff report that modified the plan from bike lanes and reverted it to shared use in the southern section, just because all the local roads in Ottawa today are shared use. That is the default mechanism. Cars can drive on my side, my little Crescent Street in Westboro. They can drive on 1st Avenue to 5th, so can bikes. Every local road in Ottawa is a shared use road. So one of my frustrations when I read reports like this is discussing how we're going to build a shared use bike infrastructure. Well, that's, in a manner of speaking, a certain frame of mind when I'm thinking about biking somewhere with my daughter. I think, what are you really doing? What does that give me? Can I do that? I just recently discovered I can put my daughter's bike with 20-inch wheels on rack and roll. I'm ecstatic about this. Now it means I can go anywhere in the city and then get off somewhere off the transitway and we can reach a local destination. We did it on the weekend. It's fantastic. Which really, even though I'm in Westboro, that means, great, we can take the transitway to downtown, we can get off, we can take the O'Connor Bikeway, the bidirectional part in the north section, we can get to Lansdowne, now we're in a shared use road. What does that mean to me? So for me, what that means is we're back in the middle of the road. There will be parked cars with doors opening. There will be traffic behind me, in front of me, at intersections, cars turning 2 directions, and I have a 9-year-old. Do I put her in front of me? Do I put her beside me? Do I put her behind me? What do I do? That's why I was really excited about having a bike lane the full length, especially as Alex mentioned earlier, it's the first north-south spine route. At least there would be one that we could rely on, even if it's slightly out of the way. So I was a little disappointed to see that walked back. I understand there was considerations made, and that's always going to be a tension. One of the notices that I noticed in the report is staff mentioned that they like to have a consistent treatment whenever they build some infrastructure, and I can understand the rationale for that. You don't want things changing so rapidly that you don't even know what you're getting block to block. However, what I feel when I read that is because of this consideration, we have to compromise here, and then because of a second and a third consideration, we can't do it there. So now it means we can't do anything. So we have to fully roll back to shared use streets. And just from a very emotional point of view, I'm just giving you is that's extremely disconcerting, because then I think, well, what does that mean for every single project as we go forward? When every local street in Ottawa has on-street parking, are we going to have to do this every single time? Is there going to be a great first plan that then it always gets walked back every single time? So I'm just here to encourage you to maybe direct staff through your informal consultations that not always be the fight we have to have, is that it gets walked back and then we have to push forward again. That the city really adopt a cycling and pedestrian safety issue and try to just simply do its best. The reason, and I'll just point out one of the considerations that was in the report for why the dedicated lanes reverted to shared use lanes, which is just, as I mentioned before, the default everywhere, was the school bus loading zone. I have the fortunate situation that my daughter goes to Churchill Avenue, Churchill Alternative, which, as you know, is next to the great cycle track that was just completed and is now online. We bike there, and we have to cross Churchill after going north. We have to cross Churchill at Ravenhill to get onto the school proper. That's fairly easy to do. Almost every car at school time is simply aware, like we mostly just have to wave and some car will just stop for us. It's really great, but getting that northbound route to get to the school is the key part. So when I read that one of the issues of why the lane can't exist because school buses need to stop, I just kind of waved my hand in front of my face going, well, but for kids, they're at the destination. They don't have to cross through where the school buses are. They're getting off and they're going to school. So, and that's only for probably 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes at night. And then otherwise we have, with that lane in existence, if it didn't have to go away because of school drop-off zones, there would be 23/7/365 dedicated facilities. Even more than that, because on school weekends it's not there. 17 seconds. So I guess what I'm just really want to encourage you is please do support the project as originally submitted with the councillors' amendments, which I think address most of the walkback concerns that I've been talking about. And then please just make sure that we build really safe infrastructure and we have a minimum grid so we can really see biking infrastructure use just keep skyrocketing as it is. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your support for the project. Are there any questions for the delegation? And for the record, I'd just like to say I think staff is doing their best.
Oh, yeah,
as I said at the beginning, it's about balance. And you know, every day, every traveler goes in a different way, and we have to try and take all that into account.
Sure. If that was a question, I'm just here to try to do my part to do the balance.
Okay. So thank you for that. Next, and I apologize, it's Mike Pitchler, not Richler. And after Mr. Pitchler, it'll be Russell Cronick. Morning, Mr. Pitchler. You have 5 minutes.
My name is Dr. Michael Richler. I'm part owner of the
Sorry about that. I got it right the first time.
That's all right. I own the Pediatric Center with Dr. Keeley at 505 O'Connor. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Grimwood and everybody else responsible for altering the plan and allowing us and our patients and our sick children to park in front of our office. I'd like to address a couple of comments Mr. O'Donnell just made. He has healthy children, I presume and I hope. We treat thousands of children, babies, newborns, toddlers, children. We've been doing this for 60 years with thousands of patients. So we represent a lot of people. I'd be surprised if there was anybody in this room who has not used our service, from Dr. Jeffries to Dr. Perlman to Dr. Gordon to Dr. Willens to Dr. James to Dr. Whitfield, and on and on and on. We've been there a long time. We do a good service. We don't just see healthy kids. We see newborn babies, premature babies, 4-pound babies, children with acute appendicitis, acute asthma, muscular dystrophy, cystic fibrosis. The list goes on and on. Mothers are being sent home from hospital at 24 and 48 hours after having cesarean sections. They can barely walk. Removing our parking in front of our building would be dangerous, let alone unfair. So I appreciate the change. I appreciate you allowing us to have our patients have that accessibility. Forcing them to find parking on side streets would be inhumane, especially in the winter when they're carrying car seats, slipping on sidewalks, falling, taking that risk. We have very good access in front of our office right now. To lose it would have been, I don't know what adjective to use. So Dr. Keeley and myself appreciate the changes. We appreciate you allowing us to continue to have our patients park right in front of our building, as they have done for over 60 years. So to Mr. O'Donnell, I could sit here for an hour and explain to you why we should not alter it and remove that parking. I am also a cyclist. I appreciate everybody's concerns, but I appreciate your fairness as you laid out at the beginning. Everybody has an agenda. Everybody has their reasons. You have to look at everybody. You have to look at everything, take everything into account, and make a fair decision, and I think you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the delegation? Yes, Councillor Chernyshenko.
Partly question, partly thank you for coming. You've put a human face to what was just a doctor's office. And I think that's important because we get under pressure. It's always easy for the city to back off and say, oh, well, after all, we couldn't put a bike lane in because this person would have their, driveway blocked and this person would do this and that. And in the end, we would get no cycling infrastructure. We would just be exactly where we are right now, and we need to do better than that. But the flip side of that is when we have some really distinct critical issues in certain places that we could not resolve, so that everyone knows, in order to put a bike lane in front of along O'Connor, we would have had to make it not only a no parking zone, we would have had to make it a no stopping zone. And that people need to understand for a facility such as this. And so I thank you for helping. We have not had a chance to meet and speak until now for putting that face to it. I will continue to be the cyclist and the advocate that will be pushing for more dedicated infrastructure, but as a councillor, I'll also be someone who really wants to hear personal, human stories and be able to respond to that. My question for you is, in order to be able to be comfortable myself with removing the dedicated lane, I wanted to provide additional traffic calming. Is that something you can support, that we may go to a 30-kilometer-an-hour zone?
I don't know why you haven't done that before. That's fine. Yep. Lower to 30, put in speed bumps, whatever you wish to do. That is perfectly acceptable I really see no reason why you can't do something like that to accommodate everybody and make everybody happy here. It's clearly the speed that's the issue, so lower the speed. But I would invite anybody to spend a day at our office and see what we see every day. It's not simple. We have children in wheelchairs. We have children on crutches. We have mothers that can barely walk. We have acutely ill children. It's not that simple. They can't just look around for parking all over the place, and we can't provide that service.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Is there any? Sorry, don't leave yet. There may be another question, Doctor. Hang on. There may be. Are there any other questions for the delegation? So again, I want to reiterate what Councillor Chernyshenko said. You raised the concern early on and asked if it could be addressed on behalf of some less fortunate individuals in terms of mobility. So thank you for raising that for both myself and for the ward councillor. It's appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Cronick, Russell Cronick, please. And Mr. Cronick will be followed by Trevor Hache. Mr. Hache is the last person we have on the list, so if there's anybody still interested in speaking to this matter, if they could sign up at the corner there under the screen. Thank you very much. Mr. Cronick, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I won't take that long. I was fortunate enough to meet with Mr. Grimwood at my office on the 16th of April, where he brought the plan to my attention, and I'm just going to read you an email that I sent him later after that meeting. I said, "Hi, Robert. Thanks for taking the time to meet with me this morning. I won't go over the issues we discussed at our meeting since you took what seemed to me to be pretty extensive notes. However, I do want to share with you two experiences that I just had as I entered the building a short while ago. Two elderly people using walkers and being helped by family member or friend had parked their cars on the east side of the street. That was later corrected to mean west. As they exited the building, they were helped across the street to their cars while using their walkers. As I watched them, I wondered how they would be able to do this if the bikeway was there. Presumably, they would have had to walk to either Gilmore or McLaren intersection, cross the intersection at that location, then walk back to their cars, which were parked roughly in the middle of the block. While this was happening, two trucks were trying to get into the parking lot, which has its ingress and egress on O'Connor Street. As they waited for the ticket to be given to a car driver, the operator in the booth, one was stopped partly on the sidewalk and partly into what would be the bikeway. The other was in the street itself with the front of the truck where the bikeway would be located. I wondered what the situation would have been like if one of the vehicles had been a paratranspo vehicle. All this happened just within the last 30 minutes on a typical day. I would expect it's not out of the ordinary and might happen several times a day. I then corrected the location that I mistakenly called it the east side. At 2:53 that day, I sent another email to Robert. Hi again. I was standing outside in front of the building about 15 minutes ago and wanted to report to you on a paratranspo visit to the site that I observed. He was there to pick up an elderly woman. He pulled into the lane just beside the sidewalk and then backed into the exit from the lot so he could align the access door of his vehicle with the bottom of the handicap ramp. He retrieved the woman from the building and helped her down the ramp into the vehicle. In order to align the door with the ramp, the front of the vehicle was across the sidewalk and into what would have been the bikeway. I spoke to the driver, and he told me that he had been to the building twice today. The parking lot attendant told me that on an average day, there are about 5 transpo visits. Apparently, they all access the site as described. In addition to the buses, there are transpo taxis that bring people to the building where the driver parks beside the east sidewalk, helps the passenger both into and out of his or her vehicle. The image of these people trying to navigate to the front door of the building through a bikeway is a bit frightening. The driver also told me that OC Transpo should have records showing the number of times per day that they bring people to and from the site, both by bus and by paratranspo. I thought this information would be of some help to you in your deliberations on the subject. Then I got an email from Robert on that day as well, said, "You've convinced me to spend some time near your driveway and building entrance to observe the happenings there. Are there any days of the week or times that would work?" And I suggested either a Monday or Thursday. I sent an email to Robert yesterday asking what, if any, observations he had made of a typical day in getting into and out of the parking lot of the doctor's building. I don't know what that is. The bikeway's fine. The problem is where. In my opinion, there's going to be a big problem at some point in the future with safety. People getting into and out of the parking area of the doctor's building at 267 O'Connor. Have a bikeway, put it on the east side of O'Connor. The only inconvenience, as I understand it, to having it on the east side is that the bikers would have to cross the intersection at Catherine Street, I guess, and proceed under the Queensway on the east side of the road. Putting this bikeway on the east side in front of the doctor's building, as Dr. Pinchner, I forget his name, as he says, is going to cause people who come to the doctor's building to visit their doctors, many of whom are elderly and need help. It will make it really, really difficult, if not impossible, for them to get to see their doctors. I don't understand why the bikeway has to be on the east side.
Mr. Cronic, you're 5 minutes up. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
I've made my point.
Okay, don't leave. There may be some questions for you. I have a question arising out of what you had to say to Mr. Imwood. So can you comment on the issue around paratranspo and access with a bikeway in place?
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Chair. So we have consulted with Paratranspo on this project, so they've been involved, and we did pull statistics, or were provided with statistics for Paratranspo use along the corridor. The property that Mr. Cronic owns is indeed the highest service level property along O'Connor, with a high level of Paratranspo calls in an average month. One of the benefits of locating the bikeway on the east side of O'Connor is that the west side of the street is preserved for paratranspo access along the corridor, because the paratranspo buses load on the right side of the vehicle. Having said that, as Mr. Cronic points out, there is a designated zone in front of his property at 267 O'Connor where people do load and unload passengers. In terms of paratranspo, our understanding is that the paratranspo buses enter the driveway at the property and load and unload in the parking lot. And so in our discussions with paratranspo, they're satisfied that they can still provide the services at this and other properties because they currently do not operate the paratranspo buses on the west side curb.
So to answer Mr. Cronic's concern about safety, you've satisfied yourself through both speaking to OC and reviewing their records and their practices that's not a concern.
In terms of safety, I'm sorry, I misspoke. OC Paratransport doesn't serve on the east side, pardon me. In terms of safety, we share the concern. It's something that's been front of our minds on this project since the beginning. And so what we're recommending in the plan is treatments at driveways and intersections, especially and particularly busier driveways like this one. It is one of the larger parking lots. The plan, for example, shows a green treatment. That is one option to highlight this crossing point. There are other things that we can do there, and that we'll be reviewing in detailed design to slow down the turning vehicles, to make motorists and cyclists aware of this crossing point and this conflict point. So from our perspective, it is manageable. We want to put attention on this and address those concerns, but we are satisfied that it can be mitigated.
Are there any questions for the delegation?
Mr. Chairman, just one comment.
Sorry, if I let you, I'd have to let everybody.
Okay.
So.
Got a problem with handicapped people.
Thank you. Mr. Hache. Get that. So, Mr. Hash, I understand you have a PowerPoint for us? Okay, so we'll just take a couple minutes to set that up.
Sure. Thanks.
Are we ready to begin, Mr. Hasha? Okay, you have your 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Good morning, good members of this committee. For your background information, and just to state off the front, I'm obviously speaking in favor of the O'Connor Bikeway today. The Healthy Transportation Coalition is working to make this city a better place for pedestrians, cyclists, and public transit users. Our goals include improving health, environmental, and financial outcomes. We're also working to improve equity within the transportation system so that people who cannot afford to own and operate a car or who simply choose not to are well served by a robust network of sidewalks, bike lanes, paths, and public transit. The coalition is just over a year old now and has about 50 individual paying members, more than 500 supporters, and 20 organizational members, which are presented on the slide. The organizational members represent thousands of residents of the City of Ottawa, and they include community health centers, anti-poverty and environmental groups, cycling and walking groups, and students. We've been asking the city to spend more on cycling and pedestrian infrastructure to implement a low-income public transit pass, and we have also asked our municipal elected officials to commit to studying user fees for roads as part of your strategic initiative commitments. In addition to working on citywide issues such as these, we're working in several neighborhoods across the city that have been identified by the Ottawa Neighborhood Study as having both a high amount of low-income residents as well as poor walkability. And through the sort of northern part of the O'Connor Bikeway, that is one of the neighborhoods that have been identified as having a lot of low-income residents as well as poor walkability because of all the traffic. So we think that this bike lane in general will very much support the residents who are trying to move to the various commitments that they have in their lives and just generally make their neighborhood a better and safer place. Residents of Ottawa need these bike lanes. When you take a look at how many on-street bike lanes the city has, and you sort of subtract out all of the NCC bike paths, Ottawa doesn't actually have a lot of safe places for people to cycle. So the city can and should, and this is an example, do a lot more to build more cycling infrastructure. These bike lanes and cycling infrastructure in general will help lead to more active lifestyles. They'll help reduce obesity and other non-communicable diseases amongst our residents. More cycling will, of course, improve environmental and health outcomes. It will also improve financial outcomes of the city and its residents. Many surveys have shown that when you ask people what would make them bike more, and the city says it's committed to encouraging people to bike more, they will say they simply do not feel safe on the roads. Thankfully, the city says it is committed to increasing the amount of cycling infrastructure, and so we urge them to move forward with this necessary bikeway and safe cycling infrastructure as quickly as possible. I wish to remind the good members of this committee that it is much cheaper to build cycling infrastructure than it is to build new roads and widen existing roads for people in private automobiles. This is from the city's 2013 transportation master plan, and it shows that the average cost per person to move them per kilometer is outlined there, with cycling being by far the cheapest option. And quoting from your transportation master plan, for these reasons and because the affordability of travel is a major concern, it's desirable to minimize growth in automobile use and maximize growth in other modes, particularly walking and cycling, which also offers health benefits. Just to remind the good members of this committee that this type of safe cycling infrastructure is completely in line with the city's transportation vision, which is part of the 2013 Transportation Master Plan. It's also completely in line with the city's sustainability goals, which are part of your strategic initiatives commitments. I just want to end by saying I support the suggestion made by the pediatrician who spoke earlier today, specifically about making the southern portion of this bikeway safer. In some question and answers with Councillor Chernyshchenko, the idea was presented to make the speed limit 30 kilometers an hour in the southern portion of the bikeway and add speed bumps to the street. I believe that moving forward with those improvements would make the area safer for both cyclists and pedestrians, and those people would include the clients in need of health care traveling to and from his doctor's building. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hache. Are there any questions for the delegation? Okay, thank you very much. There are no other delegations on this matter, so I'm going to call the vote. Madam Clerk, I believe on the motion first. Yeah, sorry. Yes, I don't. Yes, if anybody wants to speak to the motion or has questions directly of staff, we'll deal with questions directly to staff first. So, Councillor Manette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I guess a bit of a disappointment seeing that it's not going all the way to Lansdowne. I think, we always talk about for TD Place to be successful, we need all transportation networks to be able to get to it. Not long ago, we had a group of residents on Bank Street who contacted us and said that we were very concerned about the traffic congestion on Bank Street. And now we have a potential bike path system that we can put in place. And it's not far from Lansdowne, yet we don't go as far as Lansdowne. Is there any time frame that we would be expecting to go to Lansdowne? Because I think it would be very important to for the safety of residents and for and the success of TD Place as a whole for all the businesses down there.
Yeah, Councilman, I believe that we did deal with this a little bit earlier.
Yes, but I didn't get the answer, though, Mr. Chair, so I'd like the answer now, please.
Okay, I thought that we had, but I'll ask Ms. Kuzno to give it again.
So as part of an adjacent study, the Glebe Neighborhood Cycling Plan, there are local connections into Lansdowne that are being planned with that project, which includes the section of O'Connor south of 5th Avenue directly into Lansdowne at that point. Those plans, like as I said previously, we still have some final consultation that we need to do both internally with other departments as well as the residents who live on those blocks, but we do have plans to connect the proposed north-south bikeway.
What time frame are we looking at? That's what I'm looking for.
We're hoping for at the latest next year.
Sorry?
We're hoping for at the latest next year if we can resolve all of the sort of consultation issues.
Okay. Now, for speed limit, we're looking at reducing it from 30 kilometers. In the past, that has not been the practice of the transportation experts to lower it to 30 kilometers. In the report, in the motion, I guess it says, it's not a done deal yet, it says that staff be directed to review the opportunity to designate O'Connor as 30 kilometer zone from Pretoria to Homeland. So there's no decision on that. That will be come back to us once the decision is made. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, it is not a done deal, right? It's something we're considering. I don't believe that is a decision that would necessarily come back to committee because, as Heidi mentioned, the treatments in this plan are being approved today and would be directed in that motion.
Okay, so if we do go to 30 kilometers, that sets a precedent across the city then at any 40 kilometers that someone can request it to go down to 30. Is that correct?
That Kevin Wiley has an answer, I believe, Councilor Manette, so I'll turn the mic over to him.
To the chair, I think because the council does have an approved speed policy that in this circumstances there would have to be something that would come back to committee.
Okay, thank you. And my final question is how many businesses will be affected by the loss of parking or loading zones by implementing the project?
In terms of the designated zones, as indicated in the plan, all of the zones that exist on O'Connor today will be relocated or retained, with the exception of 2 zones, which we still need to address as part of Stage 2 of the project because they are dependent on the reconfiguration of Albert Street. So there are the other zones, for example, there is an existing taxi zone between Laurier and Gloucester, which will be retained in its current location. There's a loading zone between Gloucester and Nepean, and sorry, these are all on the east side, between Gloucester and Nepean that will be relocated to Nepean Street. There's a loading zone south of McLaren at the 267 O'Connor property we discussed earlier that will be relocated to McLaren Street. And there is a taxi zone on the west side of O'Connor between Isabella and Pretoria that will be retained.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will support the motion. I do have some apprehension, however, for the 30 kilometers, but we'll wait to see what report comes back on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to be on record, obviously, for saying that I strongly support this north-south bikeway. You know, in the downtown, it's no secret that the 60s, 70s, we took a lot of the roads in this neighborhood, Metcalfe, O'Connor, Lyon, Kent, Bay, and made them into highways. Essentially, we divided communities. It was essentially a throwaway part of the city. And we did that by, widening roads, narrowing the sidewalks, putting them right up to people's front doors, essentially. I remember a time in just before we put the speed humps on Lyon that caused huge, fury. There was a resident on one of the corners on Lyon who had his home run into multiple times for people trying to access using Lyon as an on-ramp to the Queensway, essentially. So, part of this is a reapportioning of our public space and taking back some of that space, especially for those of us who live in the downtown. I'm going back to what is now a 5-year study, origin destination study that showed that in the downtown, people who live and work in the downtown core, over 70% walk to work. 14%, I think it was, going back 5 years, cycle. They are our cheapest commuters, and we need to start spending money on them. We need to start giving them the space and the way to move through their neighborhoods safely. So, I'd never considered it that, the irony of calling a road that we're going to now encourage cyclists to be on as a shared roadway, but one of our earlier presenters is so right. They are all shared roadways, and I think that we need to start shifting the way we think about our roadways and our public space, and we haven't done that yet. But this is a good step in that direction, where we will be able to travel through most of our neighborhoods. I won't get into all of the links right now, but essentially you will be able to, by the time this one is done, get from Dow's Lake essentially on either a multi-use pathway or a cycle lane to close to Lansdowne. So I'm thrilled about that. I have one question. When we talk about the capacity in roadways and the time, because we often, we are correct that we do need to consider all users. I just think that we don't always consider all users, and all those users are often cyclists and pedestrians. We do always consider drivers. So when we are looking at capacity on our roadway and increased time, do we ever look at what would happen in terms of timing if we took all those cyclists off of their bikes and all those pedestrians off of the sidewalk and put them in cars? And then what would be the increased time for anyone traveling along O'Connor, I wonder? It's not really a rhetorical question. I wonder if you have an answer for that.
That was not part of the analysis, Mr. Chair. One of the things that we did do in terms of the multimodal analysis for this project was looked at the change in cycling level of traffic stress. So that's a measure that's included in the city's new Ottawa cycling plan, but we did not look at allocating all the users to motor vehicles, but as was noted in the presentation, we do anticipate that the person capacity of this corridor will be improved with the implementation of this project.
Yes, and I agree with that, and that is a good thing. But I think, again, we need to consider what would happen if we at least took those cyclists off and put them in cars, what that time would be in terms of extra time spent on the road for the other drivers and capacity on our roadway. So thank you for that, and thank you for the report.
Councillor Flory, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. We had very good presentations from staff, but also from the community on this bike lane, and want to make maybe a following on my colleague's initial point. I want to make a bit of a step back to the east-west bikeway that we approved last time, and I think part of the challenges we've seen it along Beechwood is those portions that aren't as well connected, I'll put it that way, as other portions of the site. And as local councillors, we're always asked to go back, and we want to go back and improve the condition of the cycling lanes instead of seeing those deviations. So what I'm seeing in this project is a remaining of an issue. Although there is residential routes that will get you to Lansdowne, I think it remains a challenge that the local council, once this is built, will still have to live and try to see what can we do to connect better to Lansdowne and so on and so forth. So I think that beyond our geo-tool and beyond the actual project implementation, good signage needs to be implemented to appropriately connect you in the desired routes to Lansdowne. If then a cyclist chooses not to use them, that's a separate issue. But knowing that that's a key connection point, I would hope that although the infrastructure is not built directly linking you into Lansdowne, that's part of the program. The other reflection on the east-west bikeway and link into this is, if you go down Laurier today, above and beyond the road painting elements and the plastic bollards, I know it really appears as a temporary project where, during the winter maintenance, the plastic bollards that were on that curb edge are damaged. They're not replaced. They're bent. There's puddling in the lane. I wonder, through this investment, because it's an important investment, how we speak to the operational side of the city and make sure that the materials we're putting in are able to be replaced and maintained appropriately. Because I do feel that if we go in and do those investments, they look sharp off the bat, but then you just see continual degradation of the quality of those materials and really the appearance of the right-of-way. So it's mainly a question on the operational front. What's done through the proposal of these look and feel, the materials, so that we can maintain them afterwards.
So, Mr. Chair, the recommendation in the plan today is a functional level plan, so it's a fairly high level plan. But as the detailed design starts, that is an issue that staff can look at, particularly given lessons learned from Laurier at that more detailed level, things like material types, things like maintenance requirements. So we will look at that as part of detailed design, but this plan doesn't go to that level of detail in terms of what the specific materials would be or how the maintenance on a day-to-day basis would take place.
Yeah, and I'll make a point on that. To me, it's not a one side or the other issue. Being a big city, sometimes that happens. I think we have to find a gray zone where we put in the material we want and we equipped our operational team with those additional materials through this project so that they can easily and quickly replace them as they're damaged. Because that's been part of the issue, is that we're doing significant investments, and beyond the curb edge and the signage, things need replacement. So I want to reflect that. I think I want to applaud the work of my colleague, David Chernyshenko, on this. I know that it's not an easy issue. We are amongst the table cycling advocates, and we want to see the full network and get to the most safest improvements possible, but under the contextual piece that we've heard for accessibility and some of the challenges for the existing residential, I think that this is a fair compromise to the program, and I want to highlight the work of staff and the local councillor for that. So again, we want to see those investments. We want them to continue to come, and we want them to be above and beyond in our plans, in the capital and operational side of our plans, and then above that to supplement through our strategic initiatives. So I think around the table we want to see a momentum and a speedy delivery of those types of connections as they become more and more crucial in creating the downtown network. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the committee that want to speak to the matter before Councillor Chernyshenko wraps up? No, I have a couple of quick comments. First of all, I also want to thank Councillor Chernyshenko for his work on this and for staff's hard work as well. We had several meetings and put our heads together and tried to find a way to make the plan better, and I think we've achieved that through community feedback. We heard a lot of good feedback this morning, and through the work of the councillor, my office, and staff. So I want to thank them for that. So I am going to support the report as amended by the motion. I do want to disagree with my vice chair, though, where she indicated the shift has not started, and I don't think that's fair at all. I don't think it's fair to this council or last term's council. I don't think it's fair to staff. Worked so hard. We just rolled out the complete street strategy, which was met with great public approval. We have a robust cycling plan. We have the community connections program. We're working on any number of cycling infrastructure projects throughout the city, and many of them are not finished yet, but are proposed, and the funding is there. So I don't think it's right to say the shift has not started. The shift has absolutely started. We are moving forward. We are recognizing the diverse needs of all of our residents and how they get around town. But we're a very large city geographically. We have to take into account that people are going to use cars, people are going to use the bus, people are going to cycle and are going to walk. And I said at the beginning, it's about balance. So I want to thank our staff for the work that they put in so far on this. I know they're committed to making our city much more diverse in terms of how people get around town, and taking into account our large geographic situation, the size of the city, the weather in the city. So I want to thank them for the hard work that they're doing. I know they're committed to continuing to do more hard work on that. So I definitely think the shift has started and will continue to make this a very diverse, mobile city. So I will support, as I said, the plan as amended by Councillor Chernyshenko's motion, and I'm going to turn it over to him for his wrap-up comments.
Thank you very much. It's almost anticlimactic today. I don't feel like I have to make a big, profound appeal to support this project because we actually didn't hear anyone come out to say, don't build it. We heard some specific... we heard... Mr. Chance, we heard some specific concerns. And I know that our staff, as they did with the Laurier bike lane, it's not a done deal. There are some of those specific concerns can still be addressed in the details. So I found where we've got to now as a city is we're not debating should we build a better cycling network, should we build some segregated lanes and dedicated projects in certain key places. The detail is about how fast, and not if. And I think that's very important. We have turned that corner. So I think we should all take a moment to recognize and perhaps celebrate that. Lansdowne has been mentioned a few times. I want to remind people this is not about Lansdowne. This is not about getting to Lansdowne. But on the other hand, it almost is. This is about a north-south spine, a critical route that gives someone a way to, in the heart of the city, to travel from Parliament Hill as far as Lansdowne. And let's call it about Lansdowne for a moment, because Lansdowne is a major destination. And what this is saying is we don't just build bike projects in this city for recreation. Great, recreation is good. We build them for people who are going somewhere for a reason. And the fact that Lansdowne can be that symbol of tens of thousands of people for major events and hundreds and thousands for smaller ones, and that some can now choose to take that trip, whether it's for a farmer's market with a cargo bike or the whole family to go to a game, is fantastic. But most importantly, having a north-south spine getting you as far as 5th, as it does mean from there you go east, you go west, you get over that canal bridge that we haven't yet built yet but is coming, and then access all kinds of other neighborhoods in this city. And this was one key piece to get us there. We occasionally hear something like, there's already a multi-use pathway on the canal. Why do you need another one? Maybe I'm throwing that out there as a straw man. We did receive read a few letters to the editor, got a few sort of written comments from residents to that effect. But we certainly don't say, why build Hunt Club Road because you've already got Walkley or you've already got Heron. So I think we have to remember that the cyclist is as interested in convenience as the driver, as is the pedestrian. And we don't say, well, you've got one, that's good enough. We say, hey, there's a gap here. You've got to travel an awful long way to get a safe route. We need something here in the middle. And that's the challenge for this council, for the city into the future, is to keep filling in those gaps and make it better. The impact on businesses, certainly rightly it was asked sort of how many businesses are affected, and I guess the answer would be all the businesses along this route are affected. But are they negatively impacted? And what we're seeing in studies worldwide, New York City has done a particularly comprehensive study, is in almost all cases businesses are not only not negatively affected, they're actually benefiting from the construction of this sort of infrastructure. Why is that? Because it helps to create a street atmosphere where people are saying, I feel more comfortable on that street. It's a little bit slower, it's a little bit calmer, it feels safer. So it's ended up translating into more business for a lot of businesses as well, somewhat of a surprise. Finally, the 30-kilometer-an-hour request there, it was actually, and I know Councillor McKenney has actually got less praise on this than me, because I guess, oddly enough, the opposition, the concerns ended up being raised in the quieter, less busy part of the city, and we heard far less in your ward, but it was actually Councillor McKenney who reminded me that the Ontario Coroner's report showed us an important statistic, that at 30 kilometers an hour and above, the rate of death and severe injury goes onto an exponential curve. I don't have the numbers exactly, but it's something to the effect of, at 50 kilometers an hour, a unprotected human body hit by a traveling vehicle at 50 and above is something like 18 out of 20 will be killed. At 40 kilometers an hour, that drops down to somewhere, and I'm trying to remember exactly, somewhere more like around 12. At 30 kilometers an hour, it drops down to about 3 or 4. Maybe even less. And as much as I don't ever want 3 or 4 to be considered a good thing, it does remind us that the very great importance of speed in a collision. So for me to feel comfortable with making the section in the glebe as a shared route, it's very important that we go to traffic calming to go with that. And just as importantly, we do that in other parts of the city where that occasion arises. So I was asked, is this a precedent? I guess I would say, I hope so. I hope it's a precedent that we can look at this and say, hey, where we can, let's calm our streets even more. My time is up. Thank you very much, and I'm supporting this motion and my amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. So I believe we vote on the motion first, and then we vote on the report as amended. So carried on the motion? Carried on the report as amended? Thank you. The next item on is not really on, but Councillor DeRuse asked me, he had posed a question of staff related to inquiry number 3. He was going to get the answer later on. He actually got the answer during the meeting, and he'd like to put that answer on the record. So perhaps, Councillor DeRuse, you can indicate, I don't know if staff that gave you the answer is still in the room, but perhaps you could certainly indicate what the answer was to the question you posed about the surfacing of the road was, and we can get that on the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for staff. And I was told that it's going to be asphalt, so that answers my question. Thank you.
We have the IPDs as noted in the agenda. And any notices of motion for consideration of the subsequent meeting other than the one we discussed previously from Councillor Forey? Any inquiries? Okay, no other business. Adjournment? Carried. Our next meeting is June the 30th, and it will be potentially a long meeting, so please keep the whole day free of other appointments. Thank you very much.
I thought it was going to be this way.
No, we do the SIs next.
Yeah, I just thought it was...